Well, welcome back to No Neutral Moments. Today's podcast, I have some incredible guests with me today. As you know, we've had subjects from recently. We just dropped a podcast with Ennis Cantor Freedom. Do you all know Ennis Cantor Freedom, who was an NBA player who was making millions of dollars, and somehow he found out and was exposed to the fact that what was happening with the shoes that were being made that he was wearing, and so I'm not going to do that anymore. Now he's been kicked out of the NBA, but different things like that. We've had China issues that we've talked about. There's a whole other story we could talk about Midland and China. But today we're going to deal with a topic that we're not dealing with because people are familiar with a movie that came out or anything like that. We're dealing with a topic that you've heard me discuss with Lisa Bownds, my friend, who I've known for 24 years now. We're getting old. How many grandkids do we have between us now? I have 5. How many do you have?
5.
You have 5, so you have 10 grandkids between us. What's your grandma name?
Gigi.
Gigi. That's sweet. That's sweet. Cindy's grandma name is Gigi. My wife, Cindy. So that's great.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah. Well, okay. We'll leave that at that. But the topic we're going to deal with, just before we get into this conversation with my guests, I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. I'll just tell you, if you've got littles around you, we're going to probably be very PG, possibly through here, maybe R. We're going to be as real as we need to be, because we're going to be talking about the issue of sex trafficking and sex slavery and the instances and issues that surround that. So first of all, welcome to all the guests. You already know Lisa. Lisa's been around. So I'm going to start. It's all ours. I've got, well, not really, because you go by Becca, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I got Becca, Rachel, and Rebecca. So let's start with Rebecca. Introduce yourself. You know, just the short intro, unless you want me to read the whole bio, and like where you're from, but we'll get into the stories later. So just say hello to everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm Rebecca Bender. I am born and raised in Oregon, but I currently am living mainly California, but I'd been in Dallas, Texas for a while. So
Yeah.
I still feel like Texas is home somewhat.
Yeah.
Maybe it will be again soon.
It's the best place to be home. What was the town you grew up in?
I grew up in a town called Cave Junction, Oregon.
Cave Junction. How far is that from Bend?
About 4 hours.
Oh, good grief. Okay. So
It's a
nowhere
while.
even close.
No. Near like Medford, Ashland area. I don't know if anyone's
clue.
familiar with the Medford area. Okay. We're about 90 minutes from the Redwood Forest.
Okay.
We're right on the California border.
Right. Okay. Okay. So Portland, Eugene is how far? 4 hours?
4 or 5 hours.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Portland's 4 or 5. Eugene's about 2.5.
Okay. Do you miss Oregon?
No.
No, not one bit. Okay. Good. You wanna think
I
about
love
that?
Oregon. I'm an Oregonian through and through. I love it, but I love where I am at now.
Yeah.
And Texas has been great for me, and I love being in California most of the time too. I'm between Dallas and Los Angeles a lot, and I love them both. I love them both for different reasons. The weather's great in both. I love the heat of Texas. Everyone's like, isn't it hot? I'm like, I love it.
That's great.
It's like I wear a sundress every day. I love it.
I would rather be hot than cold.
Right.
Yeah.
Anytime. So we go from Rebecca to Rachel. Rachel, tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you're living now, and then we'll get into stories here a little bit later.
Yeah, so my name is Rachel Thomas. I am born and raised in Pasadena, California. Probably most people have heard of it, but it's a suburb of LA, Southern California. I also lived in Houston, Texas for about 3 or 4 years, so I have a few Texas roots.
Humidity.
Yeah, and I don't mind it. Well, no, that's a lie. In the dead, like in July, I was like, now this is overkill. This is overkill.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
But other than like those 2 crazy summer months, I don't mind it either. I like the humidity at night, and it doesn't get cold at night. So
Where are you living now? I missed that.
I'm back home in Pasadena.
Back home in Pasadena. Okay. All right. Good deal.
Yeah.
Most of the audience is going to know you, Lisa, but tell everybody a little bit again who you are.
Lisa Bounds.
Gigi.
Gigi. And I am living here in West
Mhm.
Texas. Been here for 30 years.
30 years. Wow. And to Becca.
I'm Becca Charleston. I'm a Texan by birth. Born in Dallas, raised in Keller, just a suburb of Fort Worth.
Yeah, absolutely. Keller Indians
Yep.
is the, yes, my daughter's maid of honor was a Keller Indian pom-pom girl. So that's the only reason I know all that. So let's take a hard, like left or right-hand turn. We've laughed a little bit here. I'm sitting in front of 4 people who have been basically merchandised, marketed, and sold in sex slavery. Is that fair? Okay, well, how would you characterize that?
Oh, I think the word slavery, it can be a bit controversial in the
True.
field, because it's sex trafficking, and I just don't want to diminish
Totally, I get that.
the fight
Yeah,
against against slavery in
totally
general.
get that. In its own form, you were enslaved, but not in the terms of like the controversial subject of our nation's past or something like that.
Yeah, I was trafficked.
Yeah, traffic. Is that a fair description for where everybody is?
Mm-hmm.
How old were you when this happened in your life?
17 for me.
19.
18.
I was about 18,
About 18.
19. It's like I can't sometimes remember what month it was.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
I'd go by how old my daughter was, which is then helpful.
Okay.
But yeah, 18, 19.
So is that, give me an idea, give our audience an idea of the most common age for what happened to you to happen. Is that really kind of the most common arena of age?
I mean, I think research is hard because this is they call it the dark figure of crime. It's very unreported and or underreported.
Okay.
And so, some studies show between 12 and 14. I think a lot of researchers are going away from those numbers and looking more sometime between the ages of 13 and 17.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the data combines different types of trafficking.
Okay.
Like familial trafficking tends to target much younger children, ages like 5 to 11, where pimp-controlled domestic trafficking might be more 16 to 24, where illicit massage parlor trafficking, you have average age 35 to 55. So
Wait, average age 35 to 55 that are being trafficked?
yes.
Okay. All right.
So I think collectively, then when we have this one number, what research hasn't done was identify the typology of crime. So then we have this big, broader number. But I think the type of trafficking that exists will determine the age that generally is recruited.
Okay.
So I don't know. I think that's kind of a
I
detail
see you
that
guys
might be
nodding your
important for
heads.
people to.
I mean, same thoughts, Rachel?
Definitely. I think sex trafficking is such a large umbrella.
Okay.
And so, yeah, the interfamilial where it involves, pedophile rings and the,
Parents.
pornography, that, we as young as 2 years old,
Yeah, very young.
or even before that. And so, like you're saying, for like the illicit massage parlors, so there's different categories, if you will, of sex trafficking within the field. And I know that I work with a lot of youth. So when we're talking about youth from like the child welfare system who have run away at younger ages, then I do hear more of 10, 11, 12, where they're being targeted. And I think, and I'm not sure, Becca, exactly your story or yours either, Lisa, but, I know that my trafficker would wait until, because we were all college girls, so he wanted 18 and up because he didn't want the extra sentence of if you got caught trafficking a child, which it wasn't even, So there's, some traffickers want adults because of there's less risk in that.
So he's choosing to traffic 17 or 18 or older so that the young lady or the young man becomes, if they get in trouble with the law,
then we get
they're in
arrested
trouble.
and not him.
They become the prostitute. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why if they age out of the system, that's a problem. Is that correct understanding?
Age out of what?
Well, if
Like
you
foster care?
Age out of foster care or whatever the case might be, so that's interesting as a strategy that they're waiting until they're older so they can't get in trouble.
For some, and then some, you can get more money off of a younger child, so they'll just, they traffic and target younger. So, really it's such a huge issue that there's.
So two issues you've already raised that I want to ask a question about. One, when did sex trafficking become an epidemic in the United States? And because I'm thinking, my naive answer says it always has been. Listening to you all speak last year and other times, it seems like it's escalated. So I'm naive. I'm trying to learn from you.
Well, 2010 was the first year that we have every year the United States has a trafficking in persons report. The OTIP office is one of 6 out of the White House.
What is OTIP?
The Office of Trafficking in Persons.
Okay, all right.
So the the OTIP office formed in 2000 in the United States, and the TVPA passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in 2000. And every year they would come out with a report where they monitored all countries across the globe on human trafficking based on the United Nations Palermo Protocol.
Okay.
It wasn't until 2010 that we even included the United States in our own reports. So for 10 years, we were putting out reports about trafficking all over the globe and
Zero report
all these
from the
categories,
US.
and zero from the US until 2010. And so that was, I think, when we saw, I would say historically, a real spike in anti-trafficking efforts, because we were really starting to see, holy crap, we're in problem too. We're actually we're a huge problem in this issue.
Yeah.
And we started to see more and more advancements from 2010 on. But 2000 is when the OTIP office was formed in the United States, and the Trafficking Victims Protection Act started. And then every 3 years, it got reauthorized by whomever was in office at the time. And more and more added to the Palermo Protocol. So it used to be like act means purpose. So the act of harboring, soliciting, advertising by the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of commercial sex or labor. And so that was kind of the format that we would follow. But every year when the TVPA gets reauthorized, so now it's called the TVPRA, reauthorization, every 3 years when it gets reauthorized, more is added to act. So now it's patronizing, maintaining, harboring, transporting, soliciting, like it goes, there's like a huge list now, which didn't exist before, which is why when you see things, for example, like when the Epstein case came out and everyone knows about that case.
Right.
And there was all the suspicion over conspiracy around like, well, why wasn't he busted until this year? Well, it wasn't until 2010 that we even included. So in
An
09
instrument
when
in
he
order
was
to
right.
reinforce or enforce.
In 09 when he was getting busted in Florida for patronizing prostitution, we didn't even have a federal act yet that allowed buyers to be charged with human trafficking charges. That didn't happen until 2010, and it was on a federal level, still not on a state level. So there's all of these varying progressions and maturation of like policy and statewide legislation that has finally, I think, started raising more awareness, sounding more alarms, putting out more press releases, more operations take place. Like it just collectively grows, which is, I don't know why I think we've seen so much spike in the news. And even in the last few years with the human trafficking charge being both buyers and sellers receive one trafficking charge, that means when we run data numbers on any state, you could see 33 cases of trafficking, but you don't actually know if it's a buyer or a seller. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then it technically gets doubled in the press's eyes or to the general public. It's like, trafficking's on the rise. You're like, no, it's just all being called trafficking now, which is actually great because it doesn't matter whether you bought or sold a child. Neither should be okay.
Right.
But that's just my opinion, at least as to why I think, like, when we say epidemic,
Right.
it has grown. It surpassed the sale of guns in our country, second only to drugs. But there's been so
sex
much
trafficking
advancement.
is second only to drugs in, and I'm going to use the phrase, market share.
Sure. Yeah.
Wow. Like what's the
And
dollar volume?
I think it has, and these are all, of course, like nobody has the real, because like we said, it's underreported. And
Which was my
Right.
second part of that two-part question was you used the word research, and I was like, okay, what research?
Yeah.
Because it's almost like, how do you count? How do you measure who's, and it seems as though, I interrupted you, Rachel, I apologize.
No.
It's almost as if those who have been able to escape trafficking have been raising the flag saying, wait a minute, you don't even have a clue as to what's going on out there. So I apologize. What point were you about to make, Rachel?
I think clearly it's always existed. It's not
Right.
something that's new, but I think that with the rise of the internet, and I think that, the rise of predators having access to kids. It used to be, you had to just be driving around and find someone, but now you can be in anyone's chat room. And so I do think,
So true.
I think that not only are we reporting more, and now that there's laws and people have eyes on it, and so we're just seeing more numbers, I do think there is an upward trajectory of actual, predation and trafficking and porn addiction and buying. So I do think that the actual crime itself is happening on a more frequent basis than it used to before the internet and everything that's brought along, personally.
Yeah.
Anything else on that? I mean,
there is a growing body of research out there. There's a lot of scholarly articles that have gone in and done studies on prostituted people all across the country, and it's pretty sad. Obviously the results of those studies, and what trafficking looks like in different countries, as well as just the prevalence, especially when you look at a country like, Amsterdam, where they've, legalized prostitution. Well, did that eliminate trafficking? And it hasn't. Amsterdam has had to close down several brothels because they're owned by organized crime. So really what legalizing, in my opinion, does is just drive it up more. And so thankfully there is a growing body of research out there. And you're right. I think because so many survivors now are willing to come out and participate in research projects and to be part of those samples and to share their experiences.
But you have to escape to participate.
Yeah.
Right? Like, think about the number of people that the traffickers aren't like, oh, hey, do you want to go do an interview today? Going into research,
Exactly.
like, there's so many people that aren't having access to even be a part of. So it's like the limited body that we do have is collected by those who have escaped. And with the percentages of homicide increase of trafficked individuals or those in prostitution, it's like, it's just such a small number that's even being polled, for lack of better words. But yeah.
How do you get caught? How do you get in? You were all 17, 18 years old. How does that happen? Because
Caught
you
in
mentioned
trafficking?
today, how do you become a victim? Because I know what people think, who are well-meaning people who are like, how'd you let that happen to you? They don't mean to say it that way. They just don't know what else to say. How does it happen?
I mean, I think it doesn't start with the end from the beginning. And so, yeah, when you're looking at someone and you see them or you're hearing about their worst day, it can be easy to get caught up in that mindset of like, wow, how did it get there? Like, how did, and they don't realize how it started, which is obviously what your question is getting at, which, for me, I was, I had already run away. It was really the perfect storm. I had a ton of vulnerability factors, but I was raised in church. I, was a good kid, not your typical victim. But those vulnerability factors, when I was living on the streets and wound up living with some drug dealers, and then I met a cute guy because I felt like the drug dealers were starting to use me, and I thought I would move in with him and he would be my boyfriend. And obviously he had other intentions for me, but it started with something innocent and kind, and you're beautiful, do you want to come live with me? It seemed like a savior, to me at that time.
Right.
And mine is pretty different from that. I had no vulnerability factors. In fact, have you heard of the ACEs study?
I saw that on one of your slides,
The adverse childhood.
and I knew nobody knew what that meant except you guys.
Yeah.
So,
Well, anyway, I mean, it's
anyone who works in child
there's
welfare
like
would
it's
know.
8 or 10
The
of
law
them.
enforcement table over here and the 4 people.
Okay. Well, there's this, like a quiz you can take, sort of, how many of these 10 traumatic things happened in your childhood. And I had 0 of 10. And I'm the only person I know with 0 of 10.
Wow.
I literally had like a perfect childhood. And I was at Emory University in Atlanta. And I was in my junior year. And a guy told me that I was beautiful, and he was a modeling agent. And he gave me a business card. And long story short, about 2 weeks after that, he got me a paid modeling gig and asked me to fill out a W-9. And then about 4 weeks after that, after he knew my address, my social security number, just the tax information I had given him for the business that we had, started doing, then he became violent and crazy and threatened to kill my parents and kill me if I didn't do what he said. And from there, it just slowly got deeper and deeper into this dark pit of, I had no words for human trafficking, but so yeah, and for me, it was not romantic. It was not, I was in a desperate, vulnerable situation. It was a pure, as Rebecca said, the means are force, fraud, and coercion. It was a whole bunch of fraud, and then psychological coercion and threats and sheer violence.
And fear, obviously.
Yeah.
A lot of fear. Anything to add to that?
No.
Okay.
Let Lisa share. I feel like she was ready.
Yeah, Lisa.
I was waiting.
Well,
They've heard me a lot.
yeah, well, that's okay. I mean, I think people need to know, how do these things, so how do, something else that was mentioned at today's luncheon was everybody has a perspective of the white van capturing the girl or the boy. So true, those things happen. But tell us the rest of the story of what people don't realize how this happens. It's not just a white van that pulls up to Little League baseball fields and finds 7-year-old girls or boys. How does this happen?
Yeah, I think something that I find interesting in the last, sorry, I keep kicking you.
No.
The last couple of years has been, it's almost like everyone gets hysterical around any crime being possibly trafficking.
Mm.
And we have to remember that there are other crimes other than human trafficking. Kidnapping does take place. You absolutely should teach your kids stranger danger. Is that a trafficker? Probably not. Traffickers very rarely kidnap. There are carjackings that take place. Should we be careful when someone rear ends us on the on-ramp of a freeway? Yes. Is that a trafficker? Probably not. Probably a carjacker, right? Like there are other crimes that take place. We're not negating that abuse is absolutely happens.
Are you
Sexual
saying
assault.
people? I just want to make sure I hear what you're saying, because I think I do, but we latch on to the current crisis definition and lump everything that happens around that into that. So kidnapping becomes trafficking.
Well, like for instance, in Texas, remember the 18-wheeler that was found at Walmart that had smuggled people across the border, and they instantly started saying it was human trafficking. And it was like, no, we don't know that. Like, we know they were smuggled, but unless they were sold outside of that 18-wheeler, or right?
With force, fraud, or coercion.
Right.
And smuggling is a crime against a border. Trafficking is a crime against a human. It's two very different crimes. You know, it's just knowing the signs is going to help us to know how to identify people, how to stay safe. You know, it's important that we don't jump onto, you know, what's on the social media all the time and just run with anything that's being sensationalized.
Give me the signs. Let's say, I'll give you an example. I'm in Las Vegas 2 weeks ago. I saw Lady Gaga, Pink, and U2 in a 4-day span. It was an amazing show. And I'm walking through a casino. This is exactly what happened. I've just come back to the hotel from U2 and walking, because you got to go to the casino to get anywhere, right? When you're in Las Vegas. So I walked through the casino, and this woman and her daughter, and the daughter was probably, my guess, 7 or 8 years old. And like, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, they're walking through the casino, and it immediately caught my attention. I was like, that's interesting. And it's because I knew Lisa, and because I had these, I wonder what's going on there, and I wonder if I should have turned around. I mean, so I'm just giving you that example because now I'm asking myself, okay, what are the signs? What do I look for when I'm walking through Walmart, or I'm walking through the mall, or I'm out on the Riverwalk of what? I don't know. I don't even know how to ask that question. What are signs?
Well, this is one of those, where it's like such a broad, if we're talking about a 5-year-old, being trafficked by their parents versus a 20-year-old who's out, and there's not like a trafficker or a third-party person with them. So I think that's a really hard question to answer, but I go back to my story, or in my case. And so the times when I was in public with my trafficker, there was a lot of... it might have looked like DV, him answering questions for me. There was 3 or 4 girls a lot of times with him. There was a power dynamic there where it's kind of like, did I say the right thing or the wrong thing? It's not, and we're not, of course, going to just give it away and be like shivering and shaking with black eyes. Yeah. But for the perceptive person, you can perceive a level of trying to get it right, or, fear, or let me, make sure that I'm representing this well so I don't get hurt tonight. Or just that power dynamic, I think. And, also a lot of time, there's also the branding, the tattoos and things like that.
But is that usually visible?
Sometimes the types of tattoos that someone gets. I think, what are some other...
I always say the question, how do we spot a traffic victim, reminds me of asking, like, how do you spot an alcoholic? Like, if you saw someone in the grocery store with a bottle of wine, are you going to be like, should I go back and ask if they need a 1-800 number? No, we wouldn't. And so the reality is like spotting one person off a one-time encounter is probably not very common. Obviously people interact with traffic victims all day, but they're not going to notice off one encounter. But it's usually people in their lives that will notice. They're going to notice, heightened emotional responses to things, suddenly less available, less relationship, on edge, tired often during the day, or sleeps during the day, up at night. power dynamic. They're going to notice signs of abuse. They're going to notice an increase in money. So they'll notice the person's taking more frequent trips, newer clothes, newer car, because the trafficker has to keep something dangling in front of that person.
Yeah.
Not only is it a good, marketing ploy for them to recruit new victims, but it's going to keep them feeling like, well, what are you going to go get on food stamps and live in a women's shelter? Like, at least here you have your kid, in private school and you've got a nice car. And so it becomes a dual kind of tool that they can use to keep victims really afraid to run, because you don't have money. I mean, everything, you feel like you have things because you might have your apartment paid for, but the trafficker's paying the rent. They're not giving you the money to necessarily pay the rent.
Right.
So those are a few things that people around them would notice, Any signs of physical violence, heightened emotional responses.
And that
Being
aspect of isolation.
Yeah,
I tell parents that a
isolation.
lot when you feel, and I mean, of course, teenage angst is just across the board sometimes, but when you feel that there's forms of isolation happening between you and your child, or you and somebody that is now drawing away, and if they're giving reasons that don't seem like were organically placed there,
Other than just being a typical teenage angst jerk, you're talking about a whole different level.
Yeah, so like a lot of times online predators will, try to wedge in between a child and their parents. And they could be in the bedroom, just had dinner with their parents, but now they're texting with someone and it's what? You have an 11 p.m. curfew? They don't see how mature you are. They don't, they don't really understand you like I do. And then the kid is like, well, you don't understand me. You gave me an early curfew. Just coming up with reasons that weren't in their head before. And it's kind of like someone else is doing that manipulation and coercion. So traffickers always want to isolate, whether it's physical, mental.
Pull you out of the pack.
Pulling you away from your
like
supports.
a wild animal in some respects. Pull you away from the pack,
Yeah.
isolate you, I've got you.
Yeah. Form
Well,
of isolation.
Rebecca, I know that you, we've heard you speak several times, and one of the things that you said recently when we were visiting about something is that you were right in the middle of, like, you would go to choir programs, and you and your trafficker and the rest of everyone else were sitting right at the choir program. We were watching your kiddo and right in the middle of life, right in the middle of school activities. And how many times did no one pay attention to notice, well, why is it you and a guy and other people with you that aren't, grandparents and aunts and uncles that are coming to watch your kiddo in a choir program or whatever it is, and how often we sit among people at church or at the grocery store, and how often do we just have relationships with people that we don't ask the next question? And so that's probably stuck with me. One of the biggest things, even sharing and visiting with educators, is just like, who shows up at your choir programs? Who shows up at field day? What do you know the families behind that show up with little people?
Yeah, our kids went to school every day and lived in a home of human trafficking. Teachers and pediatricians could have noticed signs and didn't, and that's not their fault. I mean, it was not nearly talked about or trained on back then. But we would go to musicals or sporting events with the kids, all of us together, the trafficker and all the women, and we wouldn't allow birthday parties. I would always bring the birthday parties into the classroom. I'd call the teacher and ask if I could bring cupcakes there, because we didn't want people to know where we lived. My daughter didn't get to have, a lot of friends because we weren't allowed to have sleepovers or anything like that. So, more forms of isolation in a sense that would take place with my own daughter, even though she wasn't being trafficked. She was living in the home while the trafficking was taking place.
Yeah. What tools are needed? How do you help someone being trafficked get out? How do you help them? What technology can be used? What can be done that can help them get out? Also realizing that if you get out, you face a whole nother set of circumstances. If you're over 18 and you get out and then you get caught, now you're in trouble with the law. You don't have any source of income. I think you mentioned, what am I going to do for a resume? How do we help them get out?
I mean, I think in some ways it can be analogous with drug addiction. In some ways, like that individual has to reach the point where the fear of staying no longer, it outweighs the fear of beginning a brand new life where you know that you're not going to fit in. And now you've had all these, I mean, you've been forced to be in prostitution for X amount of years, whether it's one day or, 20 years, it doesn't matter. That stigma and the fear of trying to navigate a new society, like whole new world, when you've been made to believe, that you needed your trafficker, that you needed, this other individual. And so I think in some ways, there's so much that has to happen, a trauma-informed law enforcement response. So that was, I think decriminalization for people in prostitution. And that way law enforcement can be paired up with social workers or advocates and be able to do street outreach instead of arresting women and making it harder, or individuals that are in prostitution, instead of making it even harder for them to get out. Why don't you treat them with a trauma-informed response? What about specialized courts, that when people already have charges, that we can help them reduce those charges, or maybe, vacate those charges if they can complete a program,
Because we already do that with drug courts.
Right, exactly. And there's some of those courts out there. Rise Court in Tarrant County is one. I want to say Dallas County has one as well.
Yeah, Star. Star Court, I think Dallas calls it.
Yeah. But we have to have those resources, because, when you run, if you're lucky enough to leave alive, you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back most often, which means you need a safe place to stay. You need to figure out, obviously, food. I mean, shelter, your very basic necessities. And so we need organizations. Yeah, in some ways, yeah. We need organizations that can meet those tangible needs for survivors to ever be able to make it stick,
You mentioned if you get out alive.
Yeah.
What does the research tell you, those who are not getting out alive? How many are losing their lives in this?
I don't know any numbers on the percentage. Do you know? But I was going to say the
200% increase in homicide for those engaged in prostitution.
I had heard more stats on like the lifespan of just, the impact of if there is drug abuse, trying to numb or, make it through the day, homicide, suicide, 7 years of being trafficked, in a 7 years of living the actual lifestyle of sex trafficking is about the lifespan of someone.
How many years were you trafficked?
Mine was I say only because I sit with, survivors with much longer. Mine was 10 months.
10 months.
And, but even still, I, thank God, the police got involved and participated in the case. And there were 4 of us that went through with the case. And of the 4, one, commit suicide, the other still on drugs, and the other, I think she made it clear, she was like, never contact me again. I think she joined the Army and the military and went as far away as she could just to restart. And so I always, consider myself very lucky that I had parents to go home to that filled in the gap, that a lot of that places like Reflection, people that don't have the type of privileged maybe home and resources that I had, I would not have made it if I didn't have the home that I had.
Yeah. How many years were you trafficked?
Almost 6.
Almost 6. And Rebecca? Or Becca, sorry.
Just over 10.
Just over 10.
I think that was one of the things. I know Becca and I have worked with a young lady over the last couple of years, and she has a daughter, a little girl that's 3, just turned 3. And that's been probably one of the hardest things, because we don't have little people at the village, but the resources just to get her in a safe place that's stable has been trying. We have had her all over Texas, Oklahoma, and that's probably been our biggest hurdle, because I think we both agreed if we could just get her in a safe place, we could probably manage and stabilize a lot of other things, but the safety and security were the hardest things. And then forget about the job and everything else to begin with. It's just like, let's take one step at a time. And we were finally able to do that back in September, here in town, and she's doing well, and she has a job, but it literally is one day at a time.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because there's not enough services at all for sex trafficking victims. But then you start to add in things like you're a parent and you
Right.
actually have your child with you.
Yeah.
Huge barrier to getting help. There's very few homes that accept women with children, boys that have been
That
trafficked,
was going to be
or
one of my
young
next
men.
questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just heard earlier today at the luncheon that there is 2 homes currently in the United States.
2
that
homes
serve
for
males.
males.
Male victims, LGBTQ individuals. Most of the people, thank goodness, are in this movement, and it's a very faith-based movement. But that also means I don't know how much services are available for people that don't fit inside that
Don't
faith-based
fit
box.
inside a box.
Yeah.
And they're still humans and they need rescue.
Exactly.
And they need help. The
need
whole
help.
issue of not being able to have your child with you. I'm just sitting here thinking about all the obstacles that presents itself. So you're actually in the unique survivor realm, having been 10 years based upon the 7-year number and all these different things. I mean,
I don't consider it lucky.
well, if I use you're what's the word? What's the phrase I'm looking for? Like you broke the mold. I mean, I don't know. You're
A veteran hoe is what we would call it.
a veteran. No.
It's an anomaly.
You can't say
That's
that.
what I was
You
looking
can't say
for.
that though.
Well, we did, so it's already on. So you've already done it. Turn a little bit to how this is affecting the male world as well. I think a lot of people are like, this is just in a female world. There's huge issues with young boys and men, correct?
It is.
What was said earlier?
Rebecca,
like
if you don't
third?
stop yawning, we're all going to have to take a nap
sorry.
here in just a minute.
It's my time zone change. I'm dragging.
And she gave her all on the mic
She
earlier.
did. I mean,
And
she gave
that
this
reminds me
amazing
of another
speech.
thing that she said. Remember, I was like, there's so many moments, and I was trying to remember them all. One that you said, just like the traffickers are following the victims, they're following the men. I think that is so true. And earlier when I started sharing my story, and I was more candid and less realized that I need to be more PC. I think, yes, boys and men are being trafficked. They for sure need help and resources and support. And I want to have that conversation, but it just jogged my memory about, I remember the buyers, like a lot of times it is sex addiction. And the traffickers, my trafficker's mother testified as a character witnessed against him at his own trial. Like these are also broken people. If you have to pay somebody for intimacy, what does that say about your little life? And I think the whole thing, if we look at it from a Christian perspective, it's, it's brokenness, it's sin, it's, if we look at it just from a human perspective, if you have to pay someone for that, or if traffickers, they're so manipulative that really at the end of the day, if they were to catch cancer and be weak, nobody's going to be by their side because we're scared of you or manipulated, but that love is not real either. It's more, once that power and control dynamic, we're free of that, you are a really bad person. And so a lot of times, even at the end of their lives, they realize they lived it wrong too, so I think the whole is system of trafficking just is full of
hurting people.
Hurting each other. Not because I'm a sympathizer. I think pimps should go to jail. I do not believe in just like, they do need love while in jail. But I think I think that really it's sad for everyone, and we should be raising our boys and men to know, it's not a good, not a good field to buy into, because sometimes it's like the boys' thing to do, like, oh yeah, let's go, get some. I don't know. I just think all of it is full of really broken people.
Yeah, the same vulnerabilities I think that get young people trafficked are the same vulnerabilities that lure young men into trafficking. And just like how do you get lured into being a gang member or lured into selling drugs? Like,
Right.
It's the same vulnerabilities. And the more we can support kids coming out of foster care, the more we can support marginalized community groups, the less likely, the decrease in vulnerabilities that it's tempting to be a part of something, a part of a community, find how you're going to, pay your bills. Like those are all big temptations when you're growing up in poverty and you've been desensitized to abuse in the home or whatever everyone's, different ACE score is, whatever their ACE score is. But I think when we can serve marginalized community groups and those that are vulnerable, we're going to see people come out with better mentors, better options, better opportunity, better social capital, better access to education, resources. So prevention helps all of it. It doesn't just help decrease one, girl being trafficked. Prevention helps the whole system.
Well, and I think that, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't want to go there. In the faith-based world that I've spent so much time in, we have spent so much time putting people in categories of us versus them based on behavior, rather than really it's us for everyone, whether they agree with my doctrinal stance or not. There's still marginalized communities. There's still people that are hurting. There's still people that need to be rescued. And I remember when we were drilling water wells in Africa, I remember watching, like, we'd be in this one section and there'd be this Muslim group over here drilling a water well, and then there'd be the Catholics over here drilling a water well, and the Baptists over here. And I got to thinking, why don't we just pool our resources and all of us drill water for everyone? And rather than trying to get them to our water well so we can convert them, let's just provide water. Let's just rescue. Yeah. And then let's see what happens after that. I mean, do you see that being any kind of challenge in this?
Or what if we just don't see what happens after that, right? Like, what if we stop taking the converting people off the table? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just like, why don't you just give water and walk away and be okay? Mm-hmm. Just doing that, just serving, just loving, just being a human to another human. And it feels like sometimes the church is this constant pressure for converting, and it's problematic because it keeps strings attached. It creates power dynamic. It's what causes a lot of spiritual abuse, and it turns people away from the very thing that I think people that are evangelizing or doing ministry or their attempt at what they're trying to do.
Think what they're trying to do is good. Opposite. How many times in the sex trafficking realm did you hear evil people speak of religion and faith in some form or fashion?
My trafficker did. He knew a lot of Bible verses, a lot of spiritual manipulation was present. I think, and there's a lot of, pimps in the pulpit. That's a huge thing. A lot of people were trafficked by, people in the church. And I mean, it's one of my friends is writing a book. They had to take church pews out as evidence because they had, semen and things in it because they were literally trafficking in the church. It's ridiculous. I think that it would be great if we could focus on loving people and on serving people, we're in the Bible Belt now. That's not where I'm from, and so it's the opposite for me. I get in trouble if I have a mentee because I work with a lot of foster youth, and I say, "Can I pray with you?" It's not at all what you're supposed to do when you're working with foster youth because that's in the state. So I think when we swing too far in the other direction, it can also be hurtful. I think we should just...
The extremes are what's killing us across the board.
Yeah, and be there for people.
Yeah, I told someone the other day, I said, I'd rather be in the river of the middle where life is happening than the outpost where everybody escapes to the extremes and then starts yelling at everybody from different directions. And I was reading 1 Corinthians 13. Everybody's familiar with that chapter. It's like read at every wedding. Love is patient, love is kind, blah, blah, blah. And then you get to about the last part of that chapter, and Paul says, but let me remind you of something. None of us knows anything except dimly. He says we see through a glass dimly, which means no matter how correct you are, the best vision you have of truth is blurry. And then everybody ignores the last verse of 1 Corinthians 13. It's verse 13. It says, now these three abide, faith, hope, and love, which everybody would say, those are awesome. Because faith is important and hope is important. And then he says in love, but the greatest of these is love. To which, when you think about that, when he says that's greater than faith, that's greater than hope, it just presents a whole series of, we have to wrestle in the church world with who are you for and who are you against? And there's really only one person you're supposed to be against. The enemy's the enemy. You have to be for everyone else. And so, you have to. You don't get an option. So, what do you wish I'd ask? What do you wish I'd say? What do you wish a podcast host would ask the four of you?
Good question.
Well, I would, I mean, that is not so much of a what do I wish you'd ask, but when people ask me how can I help, because they, and it is overwhelming, especially if you're thinking about your kids. Like, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and it can become really scary, and you hear the stories and how anyone can be vulnerable and all of this. I think that I would like for everyone to take personal ownership of being part of the solution. I love the name of the show, No Neutral Moments. Literally in this, you are part of the problem or the solution. Anyone that's like, not my problem, you're part of the problem. And so whether it's, if whatever you can do, what is it, the time, the talents, if it's writing a check to your local organizations that are helping to restore victims, if it's, I think we all have a part to play, and that anyone listening to this, it's not by chance. This is your call and invitation to do something to be part of the solution.
And don't just pray about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can pray all you want.
Yeah.
But
Pray and
write a
do.
check,
Pray and
go
act.
do something.
Yeah.
What else? What do you wish I'd ask? What needs to be said?
She literally took the words out of my mouth.
That's a good one. Yeah, I think, to even add more ideas, everyone can do something, should do something, even if it's talking to your kids about online safety, gaming safety, talking to your sons about developing character mass to withstand hits within this culture today and this hypersexual world we live in. Like, we all have to do something. We can't just be like, ooh, yucky problem, which I've had, literally, I had a lady do that to me once. And I was like, she was like, ooh, yucky. I can't
Who
hear
did that
it.
to you?
Some lady.
No,
She was like, what do you do? She asked me what I did, and I was like, oh, I'm a speaker or something. She's like, oh, what do you speak on? I said, human trafficking. She went, ooh, yucky.
And her husband's the main one right then in a hotel with a 14-year-old.
Yeah, it's people, everyone can do something, whether it's donate, volunteer, work in that issue, use your influence, use your skill set, make phone calls, vote differently, talk to your own kids.
Isn't that funny? You think about, not funny, bad choice of words, odd, weird. The people that raised me in the church environment, because you said that lady went, ooh, icky. Well, that's also what we did in the post-60s, in the white picket fence world of the 70s and 80s and 90s. We made sexuality, ooh, icky. We didn't talk about sex. We had stupid films you watched about boys' parts and girls' parts, and we didn't talk about the beauty of what God created our sexuality to be. And so if it's perceived as the bad thing, and then you have some goofball stand on stage and say, you shouldn't do this, but when you get older, you'll get to do it, when you're married, and everybody's looking at you going, that's not the picture I needed of this whole thing. We even have to rescue sexuality in a wholesome biblical way in many senses, rather than allowing it to be everything. So many things that are so good, we allow to be ruined,
Perverted,
stolen,
and
perverted.
their mic is louder than ours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we're, I don't know, maybe I don't make any sense with that statement.
No, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to me.
I remember with my daughter one time, she was 5 and she was in gymnastics. And my wife and I are watching her through the glass, while she's out there. And all these little girls are out there with the gym instructor, and all these little girls are jumping on his back and climbing all over him and all this kind of stuff. And I looked at my wife and I said, why isn't our daughter jumping all over her? And she said, because you hold her and caress her, I hug her, I give her proper male intimacy that she doesn't need it somewhere else. We have to rescue the beauty of our intimacy and our sexuality and our relationships, because they're just being ruined online and everywhere else. Was that a fair statement? Is that fair?
I think, the church and sexuality has a long-standing history of shame and stigmatization. And when you don't foster healthy conversations around it, then where are your kids going to learn it? They're going to learn all the bad stuff from their friends or online.
Right.
And the average age of exposure to pornography is, 10, 12 years old?
And now it's 7.
I was going to say, I was actually waiting for you to say 5.
Yeah.
And first of all, America is the #1 producer and consumer of child porn. Let's get that right in the whole globe. And we're fueling the sex tourism all around. And now I haven't checked the stat, but I just came back from a really powerful conference where they do anonymous counseling and support groups for pastors who are pastoring churches
industry
with sex addiction or porn addiction. 1 in 5 is the statistic. 1 in 5 American men has a porn addiction. And that's a huge number. But, when we look at 1 in 3, women have experienced sexual assault or abuse, 1 in 5. Those numbers are, we're 5. So one of us, the statistics say, is going to have a porn addiction. And just, when we're talking about the impact of it today, where this is not your dad's, Playboy centerfold. This is crazy stuff that if this is a kid's introduction to what sex should be, and my teenagers that I work with, I'm like, y'all think that's normal? That is, none of this is that's not what you have to do in a relationship to be a good girlfriend. It's just setting a new baseline for, it's crazy.
A new baseline of a false reality that will never reward you with life in many regards.
Man. Yeah, it's not realistic relationship too, right? Because then I think that's what it felt like when trafficking. When I was in trafficking, it felt like men had addictions they would never tell their wife, do with their wife, but wanted to be fulfilled. And so it's like, where does those fetishes get so extreme and unhealthy that you have to go purchase someone else to do them because you won't do them in the confines of your own relationship, whatever that might look like. And it makes you wonder how much further, like you're saying, gone are the days of dad's Playboy in a closet. And you Google the word pornography online right now, and the first thing that pops up is hardcore smut pornography. And if that's what your 7-year-old is, the neuropsis, the
it's already being myelinated inside of their brain.
What forms in your brain with arousal, first-time arousal for a child,
can only have to be elevated after that.
Yeah, that's scientific beyond everything else, scientifically, taking God out of the equation so that we can also be thoughtful around people that are listening that don't align with that faith. There are scientific things that show that arousal of smut pornography when your first encounter is going to shift the way neurologically you're going to see and view relationship and intimacy. That could become, when you're 30, that you actually can't be in relationship. You're gonna have to go through different partners consistently all the time. And then there's all sorts of risks of there's just so much
diminishes your capacity for intimacy, literally.
Totally.
Yes.
It's scary.
So I'm going to finish on this controversial topic, Rebecca, because we had this conversation about non-controversial topics. If the culture is going to sexualize our children, then we better adequately instruct them about proper sexualization, maybe even earlier than we once thought, in some way, shape, or form. Because how do I square that circle, so to speak? How do I? Because it's coming after them.
Look at the history. We've always taught abstinence in Texas. Does Texas have less sexual assault? Does it have less pornography addiction? Does it have less of anything? No. In fact, it probably raises it a little bit more because people are doing those more risky or unsafe behaviors because they haven't been taught what's healthy and been able to have those conversations with trusted adults.
Yeah.
I think there's so many and there's so much out there around ways you can teach your kids healthy
it's
things.
Really not that controversial. I was just giving you a heads up.
There's good touch, bad touch book, good picture, bad picture book is really good for kids in elementary school age, learning within middle school and high school age, healthy dating, healthy intimate partner relationship, learning about how to, talking even to young men, have you ever used your presence simply to intimidate your girlfriend? Puffed up a little more, got bigger shoulders, and just helping draw attention to where are some boundaries where you can start checking yourself of oh yeah, I maybe did that. Well, that's places you want to start in terms of just healthy relationship in general, on both sides. So, there's lots of ways we can.
It's interesting.
Yeah, there's Speak Up is an org that I work they have a curriculum where it starts as early as preschool.
Mm.
And it's just, I mean, speak up, it's for anybody being, sexually abused or things like that, and just learning the body safety. But when I moved to Texas, I did appreciate not seeing the type of stuff we have in California. And I think there is something to be said for it being a law that on like in California, every billboard, spearmint rhino, any club they're promoting, you could easily see lingerie, see like very like provocative billboards just driving down the street. I have a 7-year-old son, and what this I mean, there's just been so many things like the naked you guys heard about the naked cyclists who for LGBT?
Oregon.
No, California. Anyway, I'm not even going to go there with
Yeah.
it.
You
But
can't escape
I do
it.
think
Yeah.
something is to be said for local laws in a land that does still have some provisions and rules for what we can put on billboards and for zoning and for no, you can't have this sex shop right next door to elementary school because, yeah, I think California's out of control. And
I would agree with that.
so
I love California.
We didn't say we didn't love it. We just said it was out of control.
I mean, it's home, but when you
I'm going to have a neutral moment.
There you go. Well, when we're talking about how do you rescue, how do you train, even when I do premarital counseling before a wedding, over time I learn, and some of that I learned from Lisa and others. In one of the sessions, I'll ask, and I always have my wife with me when I have this session, is I'll say, I need to know in either one of your backgrounds if there has been any form of sexual abuse or any form of anything that's happened to you or you've been forced to participate in. Because if we don't get this out and we don't have a discussion, I know within a few months of your marriage, this is going to be a wrecking ball. So just being able to rescue that. And I'm not the rescuer, but they've never had a chance to say it. And then they're afraid to say it in front of the person they're possibly in love with because like, I'm going to lose this relationship when, quite frankly, it actually can be a very rich moment to go, well, okay, let's just walk through this together, and figure out how we mend this. Final comments. I'm going to go around the horn and start with Lisa. Any final comments that I'm staying with the third repetition of this question? What do you wish I would have asked or said to make this the most beneficial to those who will listen?
I think we all hit on, I don't know that any of us really think it's about trafficking bottom line in our life. We all have experiences that have brought us to this moment. Some maybe wish we wouldn't have. Some maybe we're thankful for just because it's who we are now and we have a chance to be in front of people and really start to see people as people. But I think it's about really how do we just create opportunities in our communities, whether it's about trafficking or domestic violence or anything else, but how do we reunite homes to start to what's lacking? How do we hold people accountable, whether that's in church or business, of who we do life with? How do we, whether it's recognizing red flags that someone's sitting at a musical and we just feel something's off, or just being present with what's happening with our youth, because they're us in the next several years. They're us. They're the ones that are going to change the thoughts about what happens in communities. They're our legislative people. They're the people that are going to war. They're the people that are fighting for us. How do we change the mindset and create that culture for little people to be strong, to be healthy, and families to be together, whatever component of a family viewing that looks like. Just how do we see people in our community to really move them into self-sufficiency and just seeing them as people?
Yep.
What was the question?
Final comment.
Final comment. What do you... Okay, all right. Then I'm going to let you go. Rachel, anything?
Like final or comment, do I have anything else?
That's okay if you don't.
I probably don't.
Rebecca?
I'd just add a little bit to what was said earlier about that we need opportunities for economic empowerment. You know, that there are some organizations out there willing to do the hard work like Reflections of housing and providing those immediate, tangible needs in the beginning, getting them set up, and psychology, counseling, right? They're addressing all those different areas of the human existence. But then what next? What about after that? And there's been a recent study that shows that we're 11 times more likely to live in poverty. And just our outcomes, for successful survivors that get out and are healthy and even make a modest 6-figure income. It's about, I want to say 6% of that study, which is pretty small, especially depending on a lot of people live in major cities where
That's right.
That's like a median wage. So I would just encourage people to get involved, like offer safe employment for survivors, partner. There's lots of unique ways you can partner with orgs that are doing good work.
Well, thanks for being a part of this podcast. Thank you, guys. I hope you get some rest here this afternoon before this evening's event. I'll see all of you tomorrow. We're going to take on this whole thing tomorrow.
Yep,
and,
I'm excited.
Yeah, it's going to be the Patrick and Becca show. So thanks a lot. We'll see you the next time.